That was a very difficult job. We had to use every ounce of energy we had, every trick and every bit of knowledge that we gained over the year, and find a way to apply it there.
So even though it was tough for him, and it was a tough job site, he still just kept going.
What else was he gonna do? You have to keep going when you have a family to feed.
At the turn of the last century, Vancouver was a young but growing city. Horse and cart still mostly used the streets, and the ground was crisscrossed by the tracks of all the streetcars that had been introduced a few years earlier. Among all the new construction going on at the time, we focus on this building at the corner of Hastings and Granville Street. Started in 1905, the post office was finished in 1910. It is the second post office of the city. It's described as having an Edwardian Baroque design that combined English and French architectural styles. Architect David Ewart designed the building. Built right beside the post office and finished 1 year later was the Winch Building. Mr. Richard Winch came to Vancouver in 1886 and made a fortune from real estate and salmon sales to New York City. The building was designed by Thomas Hooper and cost $700,000 at the time. Behind the Winch Building was the Customs Examining Warehouse. It was completed in 1913 and was located at the corner of Howe and Cordova Street. Like the post office, it too was designed by David Ewart and built for the federal government. The lot besides the Customs Building sat empty except for a couple of small car service stations until 1935, when the lot was redeveloped as the Federal Building. It was built beside the existing post office and acted as an extension. When completed, these buildings looked like they may stand forever, but the decades took their toll. Eventually, they would come to need the help of many to save them, including a young builder by the name of Carl Vaiksund.
Carl's strengths were never give an inch, never give up. He could do anything, and he would make it work.
And he was always making sure that everything was okay at home, that we had enough money to do the things that we wanted to do and to live the way we wanted to live.
Carl Vaiksund was born May 24, 1951 in New Westminster, British Columbia. He was the firstborn child to his parents Marjorie and Karsten. A few years later, he was joined by his sisters Karen and Heather, and later still his little brother Mark. He grew up a very independent child who loved such things as boating around the family cabin on Main Island or racing his motorized go-kart on top of the old Woodward's department store. He was taught many lessons in his early life, but the one that most stuck with him was the value of hard work. In grade 1, Carl would meet the future woman of his life, Linda Kurz. They stayed close all throughout their school years and finally decided to get married in 1970. Within a year, their first child, Grant, was born, followed by 2 more sons, Greg and Michael. After a few years, his job went from an operator of a concrete pump truck to the owner of his own small construction company. In the late 1970s, he joined with another contractor, Laurie Nobbs, and their business flourished. But the good times were about to end with the housing crash of 1982.
Well, we come from very good times. In 1982, the market collapsed, and we were left looking for work and trying to make ends meet to pay our debts we incurred in the late 70s and early 80s. So it was a very tough market out there. Everybody was competing for the same work. Prices were very low.
I remember being a little bit nervous because we had just built a new house and had 3 little kids, and we didn't know what was going to happen, if we could stay in our new house.
It was once described when it was built in 1905 as a palatial monument of chiseled stone, designed to show the city's power and prosperity. Now it will rise again. Today, as part of a $40 million development, the post office and several other buildings bounded by Hastings, Howe, Granville, and Cordova streets became known as the Sinclair Center. The announcement was made this morning, honoring longtime Liberal Jimmy Sinclair for a lifetime of dedicated service. The center is slated for completion in 1986, just in time for Expo. If a building could talk, what tales it could tell. Bob Gillingham, CBC News, Vancouver.
How did you, or by extension TRB, come to be involved in the redesign of Sinclair Center?
Public Works and Government Services Canada put out a request for proposal, and our firm and Richard Enriquez's firm went together as a joint venture and put our proposal in, and were successful in getting the contract. And we worked on that for probably 6 years.
And so what got you and Carl interested in the Sinclair Center project?
Well, at this time I can't recall why we actually went looking at the Sinclair Center. We'd seen the work ongoing when we were looking around for work. Somehow I'd heard that they tried to do the formwork themselves with union carpenters, and they hadn't been successful.
The principal concern, I think, was the seismic upgrading of the buildings. They were all built in 1913, 14, and 1936, and the seismic codes have been considerably increased since then. So the major priority was to make the building seismically stable, which we did through our design.
We'd never worked on a project like the Sinclair Center before, which was more of a renovation than a new construction. We were more familiar with new construction than we were with renovation, although we were quite well informed and experienced about concrete formwork, which is basically what this was.
Okay. Well, each building required seismic upgrading. The winch building and the post office building, the party wall between the two buildings was in fact just the post office wall, because the winch was built prior or after the post office building. And so we designed a new core connecting the two buildings together and providing the elevators and stairs and exits for those two buildings. And then the winch building, the floor system wasn't particularly good relative to the exterior walls. They weren't connected seismically correctly. So we had to build in a new concrete floor topping for the winch building and provide rebar into the exterior walls to hold the wall from falling down in the case of an earthquake.
Not only that, when they were taking the building out, we helped to support the floors on a temporary basis with a great big wooden shores, about 8 by 8 shores, 20 feet long. We used these to support the building while it had no core, no support. Those things all went up the outside fire escape by hand. It's quite a challenge.
Similarly, for the customs examining warehouse, we had to put a new seismic core in there and again stabilize the perimeter walls.
We dug out a great big footing, or the excavator contractor dug out a big footing, and we started the formwork from the core footing all the way through the roof and helped form the new roof on the customs building.
By building new cores for the buildings, Carl and Laurie had done the impossible. Not only had they joined the four buildings together into one new structure, they had reinforced it as well. What they accomplished was akin to a doctor replacing a person's entire skeleton with a new one bone at a time.
Well, I think the public reaction was very favorable. The project won the Governor General's Award for Architecture. It won the several Heritage Awards, one from the City of Vancouver, one from Heritage BC, and one from the BOMA, which is the Building Owners Management Association. It won an award there. So it was a very successful project from a financial point of view, from Public Works, and from a heritage point of view, because of its standing with all these particular recognition of the complex.
The Sinclair Center, amongst all of his projects, was one of the biggest, one of the trickiest, and I think in the end one of the most satisfying.
Well, Sinclair Center had quite an impact on Carl and myself in terms of what we came out of there with. We came out of there with the thought that there was nothing you couldn't do if you put your mind to it. That was a very difficult job. We had to use every ounce of energy we had, every trick and every bit of knowledge that we gained over the year, and find a way to apply it there. Yeah, I came out of that. We both came out of there with a sense that we could pretty well do anything. And we carried on to pretty well do that.
Growing up, my father was the single biggest influence in my life. I witnessed many of his accomplishments firsthand, all the buildings that he made, all the developments he had created. But of everything that he left behind, his greatest triumph remains Sinclair Center.
My greatest accomplishment was raising my boys. That's it.